No.
All right. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Morris here with Dawa Digest, and today I'm joined with Roman and Elizabeth. Assalamu alaikum, guys.
Walaikum assalam.
Walaikum salam.
So, as with the Converts Corner segment, I try to bring you guys stories of conversion and really explore the journey as to what happened in people's lives and why did they accept Islam ultimately. We know that Islam is not a religion of compulsion. So there's always unique circumstances and instances what were kind of like the deciding factors. And you guys have already heard about my background and my story when it came to atheism, but I invite folks to share their stories. And Roman and Elizabeth both accepted the invitation, alhamdulillah. So I'd like to just pass the mic over to them to explore exactly how they found Islam initially. So I know there's two of you guys. So one of you guys for sure had to have located it first. So let me kind of ask who was the starting spark there?
Well, we got married after our conversion, so
Oh, okay, that
we both
works.
converted independently and then married. Got married.
Okay. Beautiful. So that actually opens up a whole nother can of worms then. Who would like to go first in regard? Okay, go for it.
I'll go. So, am I just starting with a summary, or you have questions first?
Yeah, just give me a basic summary on anything, whatever you feel most comfortable.
Okay, let's see. So my childhood, we were Jehovah's Witnesses. I had my first birthday when I was 7, because that's when my parents left the church. They left for like practical reasons, not really doctrinal reasons. My dad wanted a beard, and then my mom didn't like the judgment of the community. So then we left, and then we didn't have really any spiritual guidance for the rest of my childhood, really. And so then we started doing Halloween and Christmas for the first time, and my mom was starting to party, and my parents divorced. And so I was giving a lot of freedom, more than I would give my kids. Yeah. And funny, one kind of memory really sticks out. I remember just walking at night with a group of friends, and I don't know, we might have been doing something we shouldn't have. But this guy, he must have been Christian or something. He said something like, I don't remember what he said, but it was to the effect that, like, what are you guys doing? You're not like being moral. You're not minding God. Something like that. And that struck me at that moment. And I was like, well, I've never really been warned of maybe what I'm doing isn't such a good idea. And then, somebody else was like, he's a hypocrite. And the other guy's like, you shouldn't just call him a hypocrite. So that really stood out as like the first time I was kind of warned. And then I was open to Islam because I was open-minded in general. So I was part of the MSA in my high school without being a Muslim, because I was just curious. And then it wasn't really until I was like high on a couple different things. I had taken mushrooms at one point, and I had taken weed at another point, and acid too at another time. But what struck me was that they're all different drugs, but I had the same kind of vision for each one, and that I connected that later when I was sober. I thought that was like the Arabic mark for Allah, and then I just thought that was a sign that I should read the English translation myself and really consider it. And I read it front to back, and I couldn't really argue with anything in there, even though I didn't really have those concepts firmly established. I couldn't deny any of it, so I guess I had to accept it. And from then on, I really became Muslim and kind of just adopted what I saw going on around me, and that was 10 years ago. And now, I've grown a lot in my understanding, and it's been quite a journey. It takes just like it's a learning curve for sure.
Yeah, I hear you. Back in I call them my J days, my Jahiliya days. So I would smoke weed regularly, and mushrooms were also a drug of choice for myself. So I'm no stranger to sobriety and the beauty of sobriety. Especially mushrooms, they lead to a lot of introspection and so on. And obviously, don't recommend drugs to anybody. That's not the way to go in life. Alhamdulillah for Islam, because that's what ultimately helped me get off of drugs, because it put so much things into perspective. And I genuinely appreciate your honesty. I know that it can be a bit of a tough subject, but the reality is that our world is extremely plagued by alcohol, drugs, consumerism, all forms of materialism, and so on. So I appreciate you sharing that with me, and I'm really glad that you use that as a form of a bridge to connect to Islam, and now ultimately that sobriety journey for yourself as well is kind of being built upon itself. So it really strikes a core nerve with me, because I had almost a similar experience during my trials, because even when you turn and should I say revert over to Islam, you still have things that are kind of tempting you nonstop, right? And to stay away from those temptations is really tough. And it's
Guys,
I understand. Yeah. So I appreciate you sharing that. And Roman, how about you? What kind of led you over to Islam?
Yeah, it could be as long and short of a story, I guess, as I mean, it's my whole life. But for me, I grew up in a mostly non-religious, culturally Christian kind of household. I always tell people like a VeggieTale Christianity I grew up with. I grew up with the Bible stories, and maybe we'd go to some church on Easter or something like that, or some Sunday school activities. But no real, and the stories, David, Goliath, but no real doctrinal things. My mom came from a Christian family, very practicing. My grandparents, I don't know what they were, Pentecostal or something. Lots of singing and stuff. Um, my dad, non-religious family. Uh, so I grew up in a very non-religious environment, and I guess my journey to Islam, I always say, is a very literary. I grew up really loving novels and poetry into high school, and that led me to reading scriptures as well. Once I got very into literature and fiction and poetry, and the next step for me was reading these books that everyone around the world loves, and I started exploring different books from around the world, like Tao Te Ching and Bhagavad Gita and all these things, and eventually the Gospels. And I had a very powerful experience with the Gospel. At this point in my life, I was very, I wasn't religious, but I was very active in environmental conservation and an ecological kind of view of the world and naturalistic. And, but I was also like Elizabeth, and a lot of us in the West, my drug use is a big part of my story and my family history. I tell people I come from like 3 generations of partying that's finally ending with me. Like my grandparents started the party, I say. A lot of people might not get that unless they're from the US and have grandparents from the 70s and stuff, and who are teenagers at that time. And it's a whole cultural thing. But I was definitely not sober in my teenage and young adult years. And I kind of dropped out of society, and in a big way. I was doing a lot of seasonal work, farm work, or environmental trail work, and I was hitchhiking and sleeping outside and camping and partying. And this was when in my late teens, and I did this for several years, and while still reading a lot. And I remember I started just one day I looked up world religious textbooks, something like that, and the Quran came up. After I'd read Bhagavad Gita, after I'd read the Bible, and I was feeling the Gospels, because I was hanging out with a lot of street kids, and like they were poor and dirty, and Jesus and the disciples going to places with no shoes and stuff, and I liked that. It spoke to me, and charity and helping the poor really spoke to me and the oppressed. And I remember the Quran stood out to me on some internet posts, and I was walking down the street, and I had maybe $5 to my name, and this was in Southern Oregon, in Ashland, Oregon, and there's a little bookstore on the corner, and I was going to buy some candy at the corner store, $5 to my name. And I go into the bookstore, and I'm like, oh, I remember this Quran thing. And I go in, I'm like, do you guys have a copy of the Quran? And they're like, yeah, it's right here on the desk for like $3.25. I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. That's like all the money I have. And I'm like, I better get this. And so I pick it up, and the next couple of days I start flipping through it, and it's intriguing to me. I'm like, oh, Moses. I'm like, this is cool. I'm like, I know these stories, and like at this point I knew nothing about Islamic culture. Absolutely. I grew up in very rural California and very rural Washington separately, where I never heard of Islam or anything except maybe like just comedians making fun of terrorists or something, or like things like that. Like I knew nothing about it. Nothing. And neither did my family. It's just not, a lot of people might not realize like rural America doesn't have much of Islam in their consciousness at all. Like it just doesn't occur to them. But at this point, I was involving myself with a lot of negative people, hanging out in these scenes, and like a lot of people using drugs and stuff. And I remember one day I just had a really awful encounter. That's all I'll say. Like really awful encounter with some people that showed some really negative side of themselves to me, and it caused a lot of distress in me. And I remember, and this was at my second or third day with the Quran in my life, just flipping through it out of curiosity. And I remember just it was late at night one night, and I was just getting out of this town that I was in. And I remember I just prostrated and prayed to God that if He kept me safe and got me out of this situation, that I would serve Him. And after that night, the Quran just hit me with this. I can't really describe it, but it made sense to me. And I think the next Friday I went. I didn't know anything about Islam, really, except the Quran and its message of monotheism and the morality of it. I don't know. There's just so much power in it. And I went and found the closest mosque. I went up to Portland, Oregon, and I converted there. This was probably 5 years ago now, almost. And I converted in Portland, Oregon. And from there, it was a pretty crazy experience. But that's how I found Islam. And yeah. And then I converted.
Oh, that's subhanAllah, man. Especially that defining moment of needing that safety and wanting to connect with your creator. You know, that kind of reminded me of the story of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when there was someone sent to kill him, and he was temporarily disarmed. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the assailant said basically, hey, you know, who's going to protect you now? And he said, Allah. And when the tides shifted and he asked the assailant, who's going to protect you? Right. The assailant didn't really have an answer. And to me, what I like about hearing from you is that in that moment where you needed that absolute protection, you didn't rely on the material things. And that's a pretty big deal. I'll be honest with you. I might have been a little bit more of a coward than that. I probably might have tucked tail and ran in some other way or something like that. But to have that type of resolve is pretty cool, man.
I was definitely on the run from this situation I was putting myself in.
Yeah.
It was definitely a moment. And this was, so my conversion, I guess, was very emotional initially. Very emotional. And the learning came afterwards. Definitely.
Yeah. And then, you know, do you guys, obviously we face challenges every single day. So I remember when I first started my conversion/reversion process, I would need to really dedicate myself to more prayer, to learning about fasting, to doing this, doing that. And obviously they're still challenging till this day. Alhamdulillah, I'm able to pray 5 times a day and I keep up with it, but I'm still obviously not at that point where I don't consider it a challenge, meaning in a sense where I still kind of label it as a bit of a task, right? Whereas if you look at some of the stories of the greats, they needed it almost like they needed food and water, where they would want it, and it was like a source of joy and a source of pleasure for them. Do you guys still have anything that you guys feel comfortable sharing that's a bit of a challenge still?
I want to say that for the first like 8 years, I feel like I was really disciplined and dedicated, and a lot of things were easier.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe after having my second kid, I got a little less disciplined. I don't know. What else was harder? I don't know. Just some social things get hard when you're a white convert, I think, or when you're an American convert. That could be like you're like between cultures, so that's socially weird sometimes.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with you on that one too, especially with my wife and having her go through pregnancy and now even post-pregnancy, because the body is just shifting and there's all these different demands and stuff that could be pretty big. And in regards to the social cliques, I've noticed that that's something that the Muslim community can certainly work on within the masajids. It's like you're there obviously because you are a Muslim, but there is a social disconnect or almost like a lack of empathy to understand where the person's really coming from. And I think that you hit the nail on the head. Being a convert / revert, to jump into that community. First off, I'll be honest with you, in my masjid, I stick out like a sore thumb. I'm probably like the only white guy that shows up, right? And there's other people that may be of a lighter complexion, but I for sure stick out like a sore thumb. So I think that the community does need to do a better job of reaching out to one another and building those bridges socially as well. I even had a bit of I would call it like a small disagreement with a Muslim brother in regards to public socialization of mixing between men and women, right? And this was at a special event. So, where they felt uncomfortable, where the men and the women were almost within the same area. And I can understand if that's something from your house, right? Like we're sitting in your house. And again, I'm not a mufti or anything like that. I'm not issuing a fatwa here. But to me, if you're in a public environment, like something like, I don't know, man, like the mall or something like that, where it's like a public outing, there shouldn't really be that type of a massive barrier to the point where you can't get to know someone's family when it's supposed to be a family event, right? So I totally agree with you on those two concepts. And it's some of the challenges that I personally still face with myself. Huge fan of the food, right? I love all sorts of cuisine. So I can eat nonstop. It's all good, right? And we can always, socialize over breaking bread and whatnot. But to have that bit of a social sphere with the Muslim community, I think is a big one. And likewise, with people now that are not Muslim, right? And they enjoy indulging in things like alcohol and all these extracurricular activities where it's like, I don't really want to be surrounded by that anymore. So I can't really be myself around them anymore. But yeah.
No, I guess if we're getting into that, like being in like Anglo-American converts, the social things have been very difficult throughout my experience. And I'm not salty at the immigrant or the second generation Muslim community at all. I mean, when I first converted and I told my younger brother, I'm like, I'm becoming Muslim. And he's like, but you're white. Like this was not like a joke to him. It was being candid. Like he literally thought that
I believe you.
this is something that's perpetuated on both sides, this idea of like whiteness and Muslim being antinomous, like opposites. And it's been super frustrating. I've been involved in youth events through places like Tarbiyah, and I've led prayers for a bunch of teenagers. And after I led the prayer for some of these youth, some of these young kids, recent immigrants, come up and ask me if I'm Muslim. After I led the prayer.
No way.
Yeah, and I'm like, what do you mean? I just like, and then like that's, and salam in public, maybe like some people won't return our salam, and they'll be like, I'm asked, am I Muslim? Like a lot in Muslim spaces, even though I'm clearly in the space, like interacting with everybody. That can be frustrating. And initially, I think this is an experience with a lot of converts. I feel like we are, especially American converts, and maybe especially Anglo-American converts. We don't have a strong identity, maybe, and we kind of seek to fill that gap with like our Muslim identity. And I definitely, it's taken me time to come to terms that I don't need to change myself. That we have I have a history, a unique history, historically and culturally, and it can complement my Islamic journey.
Yeah,
it's huge.
That's taken me a while to comprehend too.
Right, definitely. And like not, and also with our families too. Like both our families are kind of like I don't know, they're not conservative, but they're like just like, what would you say? I don't know how to say it. Never mind.
And how did they I know that your brother obviously what the reaction was there, but how about the rest of your family? Were they supportive? I know that that's also a bigger challenge. They usually, especially coming from that JW background, they kind of have been through the ringer themselves, right? So I'm wondering if they reciprocated that type of behavior, or did they, were they supportive in any way?
See, my mother became Jehovah's Witness after I left her home. Her and my stepfather, actually. And they both became very Jehovah's Witness after I moved out. And my side has been very supportive with me being Muslim, especially they've seen the sobriety and stability, the virtues that Islam teaches have brought into my life. And it's been, I think they see it as a blessing that I've strengthened my connection with God. And we have little debates, and Lizzie, you can speak on your family, I suppose.
Yeah, they've definitely been very skeptical because of getting out of Jehovah's Witnesses. They're just concerned about any kind of organized religion. I also am a little bit to blame because I think I jumped from one like extreme immoral freedom into some other extreme of Islam, which is like I chose to go into the hardline rules and one interpretation only and certain things that really didn't feel natural. And so that was a little bit to blame for some of the difficulties accepting it. But generally, I think my family was very open-minded. One of the biggest things, though, was the headscarf. That was, I did that for a long time, but that was my mom would always talk about it. She would always bring it up.
Yeah, it's funny. Even though my dad, obviously, he identifies as a Muslim as well, too. I love him to pieces, but I actually just recently shaved my beard, and I was on the call with him 2 days ago, and he's looking at me, and he's like, your beard's too long. He's like, you're starting to look like, one of those Wahhabists. He's like, cut that out, man. And I'm just like, I didn't really think about it like that. I just kind of let the beard go,
Yeah, that's for me too.
His was down to here.
Yeah,
I believe it. And my wife, she appreciates it when I trim my beard and keep it short and stuff. So I'm like, okay, you know what? Out of respect for you, and now that my dad is talking crap about me, I'm gonna go ahead and just chop it off, man. So
you said your dad's Muslim?
Yeah, both my parents are Muslim. So and that made my journey a little bit easier. Now, obviously, every one of us can be doing a better job of practicing it. And especially, I want to give Elizabeth just a commendation for having the courage to even go down the route of being a hijabi, because it's something that I discuss frequently when I'm conducting dawah. And it's one of the major objections, right, of, hey, do I have to have a hijab on to be a Muslim? And I tell them, there's only two pieces of criteria to be a Muslim, just la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And then to whatever capacity you want to follow the prescriptions that are within the Quran, that's how closer you will get to God. So no one can judge you for your Islam. The quality of your Islam is purely between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and I think that women are a billion times more courageous than men. I mean, we can walk through, sure, we might have a beard or stuff like that, or you might see a guy with a kufi, and then you could say, hey, all right, I can tell that the guy's a Muslim. But I'll be honest with you, one of my favorite things is when I'm walking with my wife, because she's a hijabi, and someone will be like, Assalamu alaikum, and I'm just like, oh, that's right. Obviously they see my wife. So I'm like, I got you. I totally understand now. So, yeah, it's tough. And I think having a support system is really important. And likewise, same thing with that social sphere being part of that support system. So, yeah, I agree. Were there any family members that may have been like absolutely opposed to Islam, or were any one of them exploring Islam through you?
Can I say something? I don't identify as a hijabi anymore.
Okay, that's totally, that's your call.
Something on my journey, which is
yeah, that's totally your call. My mom, so she is just now starting to put it on, and she wraps it in a very kind of modern, contemporary way where it's like a turban style wrap.
Right.
And she's still, she still receives a little bit of backlash from her friends, and she's, that's just what she's got to deal with, right? And to whatever comfort that they feel, I think it's our job as husbands to be supportive of that, so we can encourage it. But
it's difficult because in a lot of ways, because like standing out. I mean, Elizabeth, maybe she wears her hijab and she says salam to other hijabi sisters, but because she doesn't look like a certain ethnicity or something, they don't even return her. So they'll ask if she's Muslim while she's wearing hijab, and then we go hang out with our families and who are non-Muslim, and she, as a hijabi stands out and like draws attention to herself, and it brings a lot of different emotions in many different spaces, and it's definitely tough.
I'm really not sure that it's necessary. I think now that it's more of a cultural practice, and that might be why there's so much backlash, is that it seems like you're adopting another cultural practice that's not your own.
Right.
I do think it is more of that now. I'm not sure it's necessary. I don't think it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can default for sure to scholarship in the Quran, right? But in regards to something that I too experience, especially when I'm giving dawah, is I've seen Muslim people just walk by and not say salam, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that would be one of the signs of the end times. Obviously, no major sign, but it's one of those things where you would see a Muslim people, and if you knew them now, you would say salam. And he had said, I believe, something to the extent, I'm paraphrasing, that if you saw someone who was a Muslim and you didn't know them, that you would not greet them with salam. Right. So I think that it's something that we can all do a better job of practicing, particularly because there is you had mentioned identity, and there's this association where if you're not dark skinned, therefore you may not be Muslim, right? Or you are not Muslim. Right. But part of the beauty of having these stories being shared is to break down those preconceived notions and to help people understand. I mean, I'm one of the people that was fortunate enough to be able to conduct Umrah. I still haven't done Hajj, so inshallah, I make dua that all of us have the ability to do Hajj. And when I was there, one of the most impactful things to me was standing next to a black guy, Chinese guy, Malaysian, Indonesian, all sorts of heights, all sorts of different skin tones, and recognizing that it's truly a religion for everybody. And that was huge to me. So, those social and preconceived notions, those social barriers, I think it starts with us, right? We've got to be the one to initiate. And I say don't give up. Even if they don't greet you back, at least they know that Assalamu alaikum at the minimum. Yeah.
For me, it's also been a transitioning from this trying my. I mean, I consider myself moderately active in the local masjids. I participate in events and study groups, and I help with youth events. But for me, and maybe initially I was very concerned about being accepted with the broader community in a bunch of different ways. But now I feel like as an Anglo American convert and just an American convert, like it's very important for us not to try to do that to our own detriment. Like don't overwork yourself, but work on yourself morally, make your amends, or reform yourself spiritually, and amend your own behavior. But also like fix initially before trying to get the acceptance of the broader community. Fix your relationship with your family, your non-Muslim family, in a way that show them how much Islam can do for you. And if they don't become Muslim themselves, at least that'll improve their vision of Islam, and that by extension, not only it's a duty from God too to be good to your family, of course, and as the Quran often mentions, right after service to God, ihsan towards your parents, goodness towards your parents, and I feel like it's very important for converts to make sure they are good with their family, for themselves, for their family, and for the broader Muslim community, because they just understand Islam more. Like a lot of my family had huge misconceptions about Islam. I remember like one family member, I said, "Oh, I'm becoming Muslim," and they're like, "Oh, does that mean you can marry 13-year-old girls or something?" And like just like negativity, I'm like, "No, not really. You're like missing the point." And or like, man, a lot of my family didn't know Jesus had anything to do in Islam, and or Moses, or like it was an Abrahamic religion, and I feel like that's a huge duty as a convert to, and not just Anglo American converts, but all American converts to do.
Yeah, very much so. It's interesting how they're able to really quickly pluck the negative propaganda, and I label it as that because it's purely what it is. And then when you ask them, "Hey, do you know any of the positive teachings of Islam?" and they're like, "Well, no, not really." I'm like, "Okay, well, it's maybe time to pick up the book and read it." So
Right.
there was a question from one of our audience members. So it's Brother Fawad. And what he's asking us is he'd love to know what was the turning point that brought you to Islam. So I know you had mentioned that there was that personal experience, and you were in need of protection at a point. But I want to expand on that just a little bit. Not so much about the experience, but when you were actually looking at religions as a whole, so like you were taking a look at, okay, this is what's available, this is from my family history and so on, was there anything that was the deciding factor for Islam being the top choice?
I mean, it was the Quran. I mean, ultimately, for me, it was the Quran, and it was from, like I said, initially it was an emotional sense of my own poverty as a creation of God, and my neediness for that higher power. So it was not a really intellectual journey until later. But as I learned more, as I became more educated about the Quran, learning Arabic better, and reading the Quran and understanding the vocabulary, it was definitely the monotheism and the simplicity, and also the universality of the idea that Islam didn't start with Muhammad. It didn't start with Jesus. It didn't start. It's been since Abraham and beyond, and like this primordial nature of the message really spoke to me.
Yeah, definitely. So, Elizabeth, the question was if there was a deciding factor while you were exploring, or if you at all explored or had any type of history with any previous religions when you put Islam up to the test in comparison to the other religions. Do you have like something that was either a deciding factor or sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak?
I put it up to the English translation, and I thought that if I couldn't disagree with anything in it, that was the turning post. Is whether if I can, nothing really spoke to me before, though I had like been open minded to different paths, and I was curious. Nothing spoke to me, but I don't know how long it took me to finish the English Quran. I think I I stuck with it and was pretty focused on it until I finished. And it was just not being able to argue with that, even at all. Even though some ideas were more lofty than I could comprehend, I couldn't argue with anything there. So I feel like I had to take it.
Yeah, I think for me, what did it was when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would say something, especially one of the profound beauties of the Quran is it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking to us directly at certain points, right? And I remember in particular when I was having trouble with my sobriety that I'm drawing a blank on the exact surah and the exact ayah, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks us, or he asked me at that point, because it was so relevant, will you not give it up? And he was particularly talking about drugs, alcohol, and gambling, and how it's a personal choice of ours to actually follow those desires. And I think one of the most impactful things with that was that it was a reminder to me that there's going to be things that I just don't necessarily agree with, but they're beneficial for me. And I may not necessarily witness that benefit right away. It will take time. So like a fitness journey, right? I used to weigh close to 235, 240 pounds. And I mean, if I pulled my old ID out, people would be like, dude, this isn't the same. This is fake. Just because of how different I looked. And I remembered that it was really committing myself to being persistent in just small steps of showing up to the gym. Like half the battle was literally just showing up. So half the battle really is reading the book and then putting the stuff into practice, still taking whatever due course it needs to take, like sitting there and working that muscle out, breaking the fibers down, and having it rebuild on itself stronger. So for every single day that, alhamdulillah, for my sobriety, every single day that I remain sober, that muscle gets that much stronger. And to me, that was pretty significant as far as how it's telling you just small steps to just build on yourself and build on your Islam. So is there any favorite passage or anything that made like a profound impact? You don't have to know it obviously by heart. I had to paraphrase my own, and I still can't know the exact footnote. But is there anything either that's a favorite passage or something that is relevant today?
Wow, a favorite passage. That's a tough question.
Yeah, because there's a lot. I know.
I feel like there's a passage. Is it the cleaving? What is it? Where the seas burst? Infitar, Surah Infitar.
Okay.
And there's a verse where Allah says, "O mankind, what has made you distracted from your noble Lord who created you?" And that one has been on my mind a lot lately. And it's a really beautiful verse. The whole surah is, of course, but that verse stands out to me right now. Do you have a favorite verse right now?
My favorite verse,
Or concept or
Concept.
and you can really, it's open forum in a sense where I don't mean to put you on the spot, but while you think of one, Elizabeth, I will just speak a little bit to what you had mentioned. And what comes to mind is being mindful. So the question that I always pose to myself is, what am I actually being mindful of? So what is actually in my head? Am I wasting my time in a sense with just purely entertainment, which is so easily accessible now? Like, for example, talk shows, right? Everything is on the root of a talk show. It's just wrapped in a different way. So you have everything from like selling real estate is wrapped up in a talk show now. Going sailing, wrapped up in a talk show now. And ironically, here we are on a somewhat talk show, YouTube talk show. So here's the irony of it, right? But we're being mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this show compared to just sitting there and watching that. What I like to kind of think about is just like empty calorie food for the brain. So it's important to remain cognizant, right? And I just want to kind of reinforce one particular part of remaining cognizant. That doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be perpetually spending our time just reading the Quran or just praying. And I've had many conversations with friends that are of extremely higher intellects than me. And one friend in particular comes to mind who is an imam, and he's a khatib, and he's a hafiz and stuff. And I told him, I said, hey, man, I'm really struggling at this one point where I feel like I'm just kind of being lazy and I'm not utilizing my time properly and so on. Can you help me out? And he goes, okay, Morris. He's like, what are you doing with your time? And I said, well, I'd wake up, pray Fajr, take my dog for a walk and all this other stuff. And then I spend time with my wife and obviously spending time with my kid, taking care of my kid. But I feel like I'm not really doing much beyond that. And he said, okay, cool. So he said, so you wake up, you think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're in a state of ibadah. You're praying Fajr, you're in a state of ibadah. You're doing your work, you're committing jihad for the purposes of feeding your family, you're in a state of ibadah. You are taking care of your wife, you're putting a smile on her face in one way or another, you're joking around with her, you're spending time either watching TV or whatever. Are you doing it for the sake of making her happy? You're in a state of ibadah. You're taking care of your kid, you're in a state of ibadah. You go to the gym now, you're exercising your body, you're in a state of ibadah. He's like, what more do you want, dude? And I was like, dang, I never really thought about it like that. So like, if you just are perpetually doing stuff, and then he even broke it down, same thing, you're feeding your dog, you're helping your dog relieve herself, you're in a state of ibadah, you're taking care of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as animals, dude. Right. And he just kind of like smacked me upside the head. And I'm like, man, I love you so much, dude. Like, you just put things into perspective for me. And at that point, I was going through some depression, right? And he really uplifted me from like just hearing me out and then just laying it out exactly as the Quran does. So being mindful, that's what it means to be mindful, right? So anyway, I hope that helps either put something into perspective or, I bird walk a lot. So but yeah, so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ibadi, I consider myself someone as an ibadi at those times. Right. So anyway, if there is something like either a concept or a favorite passage or a favorite surah that comes to mind, anything come to mind?
I think it's dependent on my familiarity with it. So okay. One of the first verses I learned by heart was Ayatul Kursi, and all of the smaller chapters. But I'm, the long Surah Al-Buruj, I spent a while learning, and I committed that to heart, and I think about that a lot. So it's dependent on my familiarity with it. The more familiar I am with it, the more I love it.
Yeah, that's totally fair. It's interesting. You just reminded me of something while you were speaking. I told myself that instead of Ramadan, me just attending Taraweeh nonstop and burning myself out, basically, I told myself 2 Ramadans ago that I would switch up my game plan for Ramadan. Naturally, I would attend as many prayers as I can. But instead of sitting there and just plowing through stuff at surface level, what I told myself is I'm just going to look up one surah and study the tafsir from people and then see how I can make it relatable to my life. So I'm glad that you brought up that exact concept, because that you just helped me in a sense to reinforce me that I'm doing something relevant in the capacity that I can. So thank you very much for that. Helpful reminder. It means a lot to me. We do have one additional question from our audience, which is, again, from Brother Fawad. He says, just curious, how do JWs view Muslims versus Trinitarian Christians? I know it might be a complex question, and if you feel like speaking to that, you're more than welcome to, given your history.
From my experience, they have no knowledge of Islam or Muslims. Like, I feel like a lot of people born in Muslim families might have they might assume that people know more about Islam than they actually do, especially in rural America. Like they don't know anything about Islam. Absolutely not. They know about Muhammad Ali as a boxer. They don't know their their biggest exposure to Islamic culture is like Aladdin, like the Disney movie. Like literally, it isn't even Islamic, of course, but it's like just this. It's completely foreign. So most JWs, I don't know doctrinally, they obviously don't believe it. They believe that Muslims are rejecting uh, the sacrifice of Christ and stuff, and probably if they were exposed to it, but they probably have an official JW page with a statement.
Yeah, I usually don't go to their
No,
website.
yeah, my mom has been very accepting, and immediately my immediate family has been very accepting of Muslims and that we believe in God, and she's defended me in front of other family members that have accused us of maybe like a I don't know like worshiping Muhammad or something weird like that. Like I don't know.
I think it's a lot of a case by case basis
Yeah.
because I think it's worth mentioning that even within the JW community, if you sin and the community finds out, they can just
Right.
disconnect you from your entire community and ostracise you. So
Really?
if they do that within their own community, what are they going to think of, people outside of, I think, they think their way is the way. Otherwise,
Very insulated community, JWs. Very insulated, and they stick with their own thing. They discourage people from even going away to college and stuff. They want them to work normal labor jobs, like humble labor jobs, and people are supposed to just stick within the community. As far as I know,
it's like worldly learning as opposed to religious missionary work.
right? No politics, they're completely apolitical as a rule, and yeah, very insulated.
Wow. That's pretty wild. I didn't know that. That's like almost like if you live in a glass house, why are you throwing rocks? Like
Right.
that's pretty wild, man.
Right. They don't engage in polemics against other religions, as far as I notice. They're very much about pushing their own thing, as far as I know. And my mom, since becoming a JW, maybe 10 years ago, studies the Bible a lot. They do a lot of homework on their personal translations and doing Bible lessons, and they encourage their members to give lessons, and it's a very interactive community and very engaged as far as studying the Bible and stuff, which is cool, I think.
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting, but even when I'm giving dawah and I use the Bible as a point of reference for the Christian brothers and sisters because they believe the wording in there to be true and to be reliable, Jesus, peace be upon him, keeps pointing to the Father. And I think there was a book that was authored saying how Jesus led me to Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And it was talking about all the times where Isa alayhi salam was basically in need of either assistance or was dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or in their case, the Father.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if she'll ever come across those passages, or she has come across those passages and had some time to deeply reflect on what was actually going on. And as always, is a point of connection for our jobs as Muslims. First is to do dawah through our character, right? So if she sees that your life has improved significantly, you're nicer to her, you're nicer to the people around you, she's going to naturally be curious. I hope that she opens that door up to have that discussion with you. Ultimately, I said my shahada to my mom. She was one of the biggest reasons for my conversion, on top of all the logical research that I conducted. But who knows, man? Inshallah, maybe you guys could be the reason why she accepts Islam.
Maybe so, inshallah. Yeah, and this is another thing. Initially, I reacted very strongly as well, like similar to what Elizabeth said. I went very hard into Islam and trying to practice things very strictly. and was actually rather harsh towards my family and friends. I cut off a lot of relationships, old friendships that I really regret doing, and I was very harsh towards some of my friends about their use of substances and like their lack of religiosity, and I was awful and very toxic in like my I was still projecting a lot of this maybe arrogance that I had and like using Islam as an excuse to project that onto people, and that was a hard lesson to learn too. Like just because I became it wasn't a one way, or what am I trying to say? It wasn't like a Islam is a journey, you know. Surrender to God is a journey, and it doesn't happen all at once. I think a lot of converts know that. Like for me, like sobriety wasn't all at once. It took me a minute after my shahada. I relapsed maybe once or twice, just with weed. I'm never much of a drinker, but sobriety has been a huge part of my journey, and being more peaceful with non-Muslims. I love to see my family, some of our siblings, become more Christian. I love seeing them become Christian because ultimately they're becoming more moral. They're not engaging in extramarital relationships. They're being more temperate with their use of things and being more kind in prayer. I love to see my family become more Christian. I'd love if they become Muslim, but if they become Christian, more practicing and prayerful, that makes me happy as well. And that's been a big part of my journey as well. Just coming to terms with that. I don't know if that makes sense.
It definitely does. I still have old friends that I wish I could take some words back, and it was simply because not that I said something completely ridiculous, but it was just because of what you mentioned. It was a journey, and where I was at in my journey was totally different to where they were at in their journey in life. And as much good as you want for someone else, because we as Muslims feel like we're holding the truth, and it's our duty to share that truth with everybody that we know and some, right? And I think that I've for sure, actually, I'm not going to say I think, I know for a fact that I have crossed the boundaries and encroached on their personal journeys in efforts to bring them closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But ultimately, I've realized that what I was doing at that time, I know it might sound crass, and I'm not trying to fully justify my actions because obviously I feel bad. And that's the mark of someone that's humble. So I'm really glad that you said something like that. May Allah reward you for that, bro. I think that at the time, if I didn't say those things, I would not have significantly pushed them away, which would have impacted my Islam. So like, as I reflect on it, and I think to myself, like, okay, I wasn't a complete a-hole, but maybe I said those things because I needed to push the other person away that much.
Like a defense mechanism.
Yeah, it was a defense mechanism for sure.
I definitely feel that.
Yeah. And it sucks because when I try to open the theme up with them, even till this day, they still think that, everyone that's religious is a nut job, right. That we're being brainwashed, mind controlled, manipulated in some way, shape, or form. And, I had the person tell me, you're the one that changed. I'm not the one that changed, famous words, right? And so what was crazy is this was a long time ago, and shoot, man, this is probably about 8 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, something like that. And I was pretty bummed. I was down at that point. I was like super depressed, and I reached out to a friend of mine, and we ended up going to having some dinner. And they said to me, they turned to me and they said, she's a non-Muslim, right? She said to me, she said, hey, you had shared your story with me and the interaction that you had with your other friend. Don't you think that it's weird that you've been friends with that person for, I think at that time it was like 7 or 8 years, and they haven't changed? Mm-hmm. And I was just like, I never really thought about it like that, So she kind of, again, whipped me into shape in a sense of like, if you're growing through life and you're becoming older and you're exposing yourself to the beauties of difference in life, you're reading different books, you're exposing yourself to different cultures, you're studying religion, or you're studying atheism, or you're studying this, or you're studying that, naturally you're going to change.
Right.
So that must mean that other person has literally put themselves in a bubble and refuse to change their ways because they believe that their ways are perfect and there's nothing better. Whereas I'm under the philosophy that we should be kind of in a constant state of improvement. So you just got to pick your source, right? So like if your source is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, naturally you're going to go towards that improvement route for the better. Whereas if your source is yourself and your own desires, who knows where you're going to end up, right?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Definitely.
Yeah. So we've got about 5 minutes left. So I just want to see if there's any closing thoughts that either one of you wish to share. This is either for somebody that is exploring Islam or has just touched up on it or has never heard about it or anything that you feel like sharing.
I feel like part of why I went really hard is partly my own wanting to get away from the extreme kind of immoral things that I was doing. But also it may have been because people expect a lot from converts, maybe especially hijabis, to like represent and know things back and forth. But maybe just kind of, if someone's interested in Islam, to be prepared for someone trying to push you too far and try to hold your ground and try to insist on learning at your own pace and thinking for yourself.
That's a really good piece of advice, actually. That's a really good piece of advice. Yeah.
Yeah, I think part of that is keeping yourself like emotionally safe and grounded. If I had any closing words, yeah, take it easy for new converts, and take it easy. Have patience with yourself. Have patience with the rest of the community. Don't expect too much from the rest of the community either. Don't put all your hope in like I don't know. Don't expect the world from people going through their own journeys either. Like that includes like the existing Muslim community. Don't put too much pressure on them or expectations on them because you'll be disappointed by humans. Reform yourself with patience. Be prayerful, and don't beat yourself up. And like I said in the beginning, rectify your relationships with your closest people, your family and friends, and focus on those for sure. And always be learning, always be curious, and read the Quran every day, even if it's a little bit. Just honestly, makes the biggest difference in your life having that connection with God daily. Outside of Salah, read the Quran, study it.
Really good advice. All right, and then for our audience that's here today, do you guys have any final questions for either Roman or Elizabeth on what you guys would like to ask? We've got about 2 minutes left, so now is your chance to probe their brains. See if anything comes up. I'm just going through there's a pretty big chat log. So
yeah, I didn't realize we could see it until now.
Yeah, you could see it.
That's cool.
Yeah, I saw that.
What is this?
It's how do I explain? She's an actress. Yeah.
Oh, for the Jamie Lee Curtis one?
I've never heard of this.
It's pretty cool.
What does she do?
Wait, go back to our stuff.
Okay.
Do they ask you?
What are you trying to improve up on right now? That's a good question. And we love The Office, too. So that's great.
Yeah, extra points for that.
Yeah. What are we trying to improve on right now? I really want to, I don't know, try to get involved with more, like today we went out with the local sister in Sacramento, Sister Pamela. She does a nonprofit Everyone Should Eat. Trying to improve on doing action. I'm a big reader, and so sometimes I can get caught up in reading a bunch of like history stuff and like just a lot of in your head kind of stuff. I'm trying to improve on doing good deeds. There's been a couple community river cleanups we've been doing. this sister doing Everyone Should Eat here in Sacramento. She goes out, she makes these huge soups. She goes out to the homeless people and straight up to the tent sites, these campsites. This older woman, like, I don't want to guess her age, but older. And she's just the realest Muslim lady I know, just going out. She feeds so many people. And I just try to be more active rather than being stuck in my head all the time.
Right on. All right. Well, that pretty much concludes it for today. I've been enough of a time vampire. I promised 1 hour and I got 1 hour out. Thank you guys for joining us. And Jazakallah khairan to you, Roman and Elizabeth. It's been a pleasure. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless your guys' journey. And I hope that this isn't the last time that I get to speak to you guys. I particularly have more questions about insights into JWs and so on.
Yeah.
There's a couple folks that popped on for JW stuff, so looks like the audience was really interested in that as well.
I'll invite my mom to the next stream.
Yeah, to invite your mom. I would love to have her on as a guest, seriously. And obviously, it'll be a very friendly environment for some pleasant discussions. Thank you guys to the audience that joined us today. I know that there's other things that you could be doing with your day, but I hope that streams like this increase your guys' iman and your connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Always a pleasure to have you guys. Be sure to like, subscribe to help boost the algorithm and get this message out. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for all these dawah efforts. If you'd like to be a guest, please feel free to email me at dawahdigest@gmail.com. And please pop on and share your conversion story and help enlighten others. So with those final words, I bid you all assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Bye. Thank you.
Studio.